Madam Secretary, I want to thank you for being here today before the committee. We're glad that you have returned safely after traveling to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates last week. I'm sure you were well received abroad, but I hope the purpose of your trip was not to urge these foreign nations to boost their output of fossil fuels, especially while President Biden and his administration, including U.S. Secretary of the Department of Energy, have taken several actions to make the United States less energy independent, including by trying to shut down American fossil fuel production. President Biden and the Secretary should not be prioritizing foreign energy over American energy when we have the natural resources and producers to be energy independent. Unfortunately, the Biden administration has pursued policies that have jeopardized economic opportunities, threatened U.S. energy security and national security, raised energy costs on Americans, and hurt American small businesses. Today marks the committee's 15th hearing at the full and subcommittee level during the 118th Congress, specifically related to the Biden administration's American energy policies and burdensome regulations. Our oversight hearings have examined a range of topics, including energy efficiency standards, critical minerals, nuclear energy, and the administration's ban on liquefied natural gas export permits to non-free trade agreement countries. Decisions like the Department's ban on new liquefied natural gas export permits are just the most recent example of how the Department has jeopardized our energy security, jobs, and producers. According to the Center for LNG, increasing LNG exports provides great economic benefits like bolstering labor incomes and lowering the cost of imported goods, thereby protecting consumers from inflation. Further, we know that increased U.S. LNG sent to Europe will safeguard the continent from reliance on Russian gas. Rather than ask questions about the consequences of the LNG ban or other administration policies, however, today we will likely hear committee Democrats demonize U.S. oil and gas producers. While Democrats politicize energy and target American producers, average national gasoline prices surged on President Biden's watch to an all-time high, with an average national price of gas reaching more than $5 a gallon in the summer of 2022. Congressional Republicans share a different vision for America's energy future. On March 30th, 2023, the Republican majority House passed H.R. 1, the Lower Energy Cost Act, which would reform the permitting process, lower prices for consumers, and help restore U.S. energy leadership for the world. And today, the committee has released a report detailing the harms the Biden administration policies have inflicted on American consumers and the U.S. economy, which I will enter into the record with unanimous consent, without objections ordered. It's undeniable that gas prices are higher under the Biden administration, with gas prices surging to over $5 nationally in 2022 as a result of Biden administration policies. And as the Biden administration rapidly overloads our grid with its electrification at all cost push, American consumers face skyrocketing electricity prices. Electricity prices have risen faster than the pace of inflation and more so than any other commodity. Our committee's work in the 118th Congress has ranged from the Department's LNG ban, elimination of consumer choices for home appliances, historic depletion of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and of course, the waste of taxpayer dollars on the Secretary's now famous and disastrous 4-day summer 2023 electric vehicle road trip. This work has expanded to include the committee's government-wide investigation into the Chinese Communist Party's ongoing efforts to target, influence, and undermine every sector and community in the United States, including the energy sector. But the Biden administration's rhetoric on climate change and adoption of radical Green New Deal policies, specifically its electronic vehicle mandates, play directly into China's hands. Committee Republicans will continue to conduct oversight of government waste, fraud, and abuse. We will not stand by silently as the Biden administration subverts America's energy independence and demonizes this critical industry. I now yield to the ranking member for his opening remarks.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you, Secretary Granholm, for joining us today. And I also hope that you're not traveling around the world promoting more fossil fuel combustion and use. My colleagues have invited you here today to testify about President Biden's so-called war on energy, which we know doesn't exist. For better or worse, the United States is producing record high levels of oil and natural gas today. It's never been so high, so our colleagues can breathe easy if that is their principal interest. At the same time, President Biden and the Department of Energy, in partnership with Democrats in Congress, are making historic and necessary investments in clean energy technology. Climate change is the defining crisis of our time, and we know that burning fossil fuels is by far the leading factor in contributing to climate change, a fact that fossil fuel companies knew about decades ago but suppressed. Our recent joint staff report with the Senate Budget Committee showed the evolution of big oil's efforts to deceive the American public from outright denial of the facts that they understood in the 1960s and 70s, and then more up-to-date, subtle propaganda and disinformation efforts today to try to lead us away from the solutions that we need. Because of this deception, we've lost crucial decades in which we could have been systematically transitioning away from dirty, polluting fossil fuels to the cleaner alternative energies we need. Now we are forced to take much more dramatic actions to transition to clean energy as quickly as possible. With every passing day, the consequences of climate change grow in intensity. In just the last week, we've learned not only are the sea levels rising, not only are we seeing record forest fires, record drought, record flooding in different parts of the country, hurricanes of record velocity, but there is even greater disruption taking place to people's daily lives. There are swarms of mosquitoes in Harris County, Texas, in unprecedented numbers and sizes. The oceans are actually changing colors. We are in a very rapid downward descent because of climate change. Researchers have found that the economic damage caused by climate change is 6 times worse than was previously predicted. A new paper estimates that just 1 degree Celsius of warming would cause the world's GDP to decline by 12%. We already hit more than 1 degree Celsius of warming since pre-industrial times and are currently on track to hit 3 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century. We must break free from the carbon trap, which will require significant effort and investment into the clean energy transition. The Department of Energy, I believe, is doing that thanks to funding from the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. Because of these historic investments the American people have made, the U.S. is on track by 2030 to double the amount of clean energy we generate and to cut emissions by 40 to 50% compared to 2005 levels. The administration's focus on clean energy has also spurred over $400 billion of new investments in clean energy by private companies, about half of which is specifically being invested in manufacturing today. The U.S. economy has added 800,000 manufacturing jobs since the start of this administration, and the Inflation Reduction Act is anticipated to create more than 1.5 million jobs over the next decade. We have not had an unemployment rate this low in more than 50 years, and the clean energy economy plays a very important role in this economic renaissance. Unlike my colleagues across the aisle who want to promote falsehoods about this imaginary war on energy, Democrats recognize that the transition to clean energy is not just good for our climate and good for our planet, but also good for our economy and good for our communities. Every single one of our districts is profiting right now from the benefits of projects funded by the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure legislation. In fact, a company in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, in the Good Chairman's District, is receiving $480 million in bipartisan infrastructure law funding for sustainable battery manufacturing. Another company in Calvert City, Kentucky, also in the Chairman's District, which I use by way of illustration, is receiving up to $35 million in federal cost share under the Inflation Reduction Act to electrify and decarbonize its heating process. This is taking place all over America today. This is happening now. These types of investments are significant and historic. They're exactly what we need to move away from the dangerous dependence on fossil fuels. And that's not a question of moral guilt. The whole society is implicated in it, but we've got to save ourselves from the implications of it. I commend the work of the Biden-Harris administration. I commend you, Madam Secretary, for everything you've been doing to ensure the United States is able to transition effectively away from dirty energy to clean energy, while also making sure that our economy is strong. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Today, we are joined by the Honorable Jennifer Granholm, who was sworn into office on February 25th, 2021, as the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Energy. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witness will please stand and raise her right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witness answered in the affirmative, and thank you. We appreciate you being here today and look forward to your testimony. Let me remind you, Madam Secretary, that we have read your written statement and it will appear in full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral statement to 5 minutes. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, the light will turn yellow. When the red light comes on, your 5 minutes have expired. We would ask that you wrap up. I now recognize Secretary Granholm for her opening statement.
Great. Thank you so much, Chairman Comer, Ranking Member Raskin, and members of the committee. I'm so proud to be here representing more than 100,000 talented, hardworking public servants who make up the Department of Energy. 3 years ago, I joined this administration believing that if America could come together around a national energy strategy, we could restore American manufacturing, we could create jobs, we could address the climate crisis and become energy independent and secure. And today, we are doing just that. America is back. Thanks to Congress's efforts and the President's vision, we are executing a focused, deliberate strategy that positions our businesses to dominate, our workers to compete, and our communities to thrive. And it is working. We're rebuilding our manufacturing backbone. Since the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, for example, companies have announced more than 600 new or expanded plants on American soil just for clean energy. Hundreds of billions in planned investment for batteries, for electric vehicles, solar, wind, nuclear, and more. Tens of thousands of jobs being created from the industrial Midwest to the industrious Mid-Atlantic to the Southern Battery Belt to the Southwest Sun Belt to the West Coast to the Gulf Coast. By reshoring and onshoring manufacturing supply chains, we're also catching up to our global competitors. For example, right now, China possesses 65% of the world's lithium and 100% of its graphite, which are critical for 21st century technologies. But because of the President's investments, U.S. graphite production is expected to increase 25-fold by 2030. Lithium production is expected to increase 85-fold. And through it all, we have spurred a nationwide effort to modernize America's energy system, which will bring more clean power to more families at lower costs. For example, we're supporting the build-out of more than 600 miles of new transmission lines. This strategy to strengthen America's energy security, to protect American jobs, and to save American families money is guiding our work across the department. It's behind our successful usage of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Our sales in the summer of 2022 kept Russia's weaponization of energy markets from hurting our consumers at the pump. And now our replenishment strategy has almost finished restoring those supplies at a bargain for the taxpayer. The strategy has also guided our energy efficiency rulemaking process. For example, last month, DOE finalized energy conservation standards for domestic power transformers that'll increase their efficiency and competitiveness while saving American steel jobs. In short, Congress and the President have crafted a historic strategy to invest in America, and DOE is proud to help implement it. We recognize that we've been entrusted with unprecedented resources to do so, and that's why at every step of the way we're taking extra measures to protect the American taxpayers' investment, to meet the goals set forth by Congress, and to avoid potential for waste, fraud, and abuse. We've set up new processes for our offices to coordinate on program designs so that we're eliminating redundancies, leveraging expertise across the department, and learning from past experiences. From day one, we've prioritized hiring specialists in project and program oversight, in grant management, in contracting, financial and audit oversight. And we regularly and proactively seek guidance from DOE's Office of Inspector General on how to best protect the integrity of our investments. Our continued cooperation will be essential for keeping this momentum and building a stronger and safer future for the American people. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. We'll now begin our questions. We'll begin with the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, thank you for appearing before us today. We're going to be moving rather quickly today, so I'm going to ask you to focus here. Has the Department of Energy determined whether exporting LNG to our allies around the world is in the public interest? Yes or no?
We're in the middle of a study
We're in the middle of
updating our assessment of what is in the public
Would that be a
interest.
no?
We're in the middle of updating our
So you have
assessment.
not yet determined.
It will be complete in the first
That
quarter
will be a
of
no,
next year.
ma'am. Please. Let's not effort to filibuster each other. I ask you a simple question. Has the Department of Energy determined whether exporting LNG to our allies around the world is in the public interest?
And I'm answering in a simple way. We are in the middle of updating our assessment.
That would be a no. Have you made the touchdown? Have you got to the end zone? Well, we're working on it.
We're in the middle of the
got a
play, sir.
first down. That would be no. You have not made it to the end zone yet. This is what we're dealing with, Mr. Chairman. We can't get a straight answer out of this administration. We'll see. You're on record today. Why have you issued a long-term ban on export permit approvals prior to determining whether or not exporting LNG is within the public interest?
Number one, we have not issued a ban. Number two, it is not long-term. It is a pause to update our assessment. The assessment will be done by the first quarter of next year.
Why have you issued the ban according to your
It is not a ban.
determination?
It is not a ban, sir.
We're not going to get a straight answer out of you today, are we?
It is
Mr.
not a ban,
Secretary?
sir. That is a
What
straight answer.
statutory, it is a ban. What statutory authority do you claim to have to pause issuing permits? I'll use your language, to pause issuing permits. What statutory authority?
The Natural Gas Act requires that we determine whether authorizations for export of liquefied natural gas are in the public interest. We are determining what is in the public
Precisely.
interest.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record what I'm about to read. Citing from Section 3 of the Natural Gas Act, Title 15, U.S. Code 717, Bravo, under Commerce and Trade, exportation of or importation of natural gas, LNG terminals, under paragraph alpha, mandatory authorization order. It says, and I quote, "The Commission shall issue such order upon application unless, after opportunity for hearing, it finds," not trying to find, in the process of finding, talking about finding, writing about finding, it finds that the proposed exportation or importation will not be consistent with the public interest. Mr. Chairman, I ask it to be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
In the Natural Gas Act, as I've just stated, it clearly states that you shall issue permits unless you find that it's not in the public interest, which has not yet happened, and yet you have issued You have mandated a pause. You have not issued permits. How can you pause permits and approvals if you've not determined that exporting LNG is or is not in the public interest?
We are updating our assessment to make that exact determination, sir.
Is that your answer?
Yes.
That's your answer. I ask you how.
How? Because the Act
say you
says
updated.
unless. The Act says
I've
unless it's
clearly
in the
stated,
public
ma'am,
interest.
The law requires you. Does the law require you to issue permits unless you have determined that it's not in the public interest?
Correct.
All right. Well, have you determined that it's not in the public interest?
That's why we're doing the
No,
assessment.
you have not.
That's why we're
And
doing
yet
the
you
assessment,
have-
sir.
And yet you have paused permits. The Obama administration conducted a study in 2014 and 15. During that study, the DOE continued to process non-FTA export authorization applications while updating its studies. You have precedent established by a former Democrat president in your department that states that if you have pending applications that have been completed and are standing by, then you should move forward while you're in the process of not quite getting to the end zone on determining whether or not it's in the public interest. It's clear to me that the American men and women around the country are watching today, and that we recognize that you do not have the authority nor the precedence to take the actions that you have indeed taken. This pause, Mr. Chairman, jeopardizes billions of dollars of interest, American jobs, American families, and a clean, reliable energy source that contributes to our national security and energy security and world security for our allies. This is yet another illegal action by the Biden administration being forced upon we the people. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields. Chair now recognizes Ranking Member Raskin from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Granholm, welcome to the Oversight Committee.
Thank you.
And thank you for your great hard work on behalf of the American people. And let me start with something that I mentioned before, which is we actually have record high production of gas and oil right now. Isn't that right?
Correct.
Will you explain how that's measured and how that's monitored?
Well, we are the oil and gas industry. We are record exporters of liquefied natural gas. None of that has been stopped. We are the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas. We are the world's largest producer of oil, crude oil as well.
Yeah. So you're undertaking this public interest process that the very distinguished gentleman from Louisiana just invoked. You are in the middle of that process. And so you have paused in the LNG export permit process. What effect will that actually have on LNG exports in the near and foreseeable future?
Yeah, thank you for the question, because it has absolutely no impact on any exports that are happening now. We have authorized 48 billion cubic feet of export of liquefied natural gas, 48 billion. That is 3 times what we are currently exporting. We are the largest exporter at 14 billion cubic feet. And in addition to that, we have authorized another 22 that are under construction, 22 billion that are currently under construction. The bottom line is so much has happened in terms of exports of liquefied natural gas since the last assessment was done. We have exploded in our authorizations. So this pause only applies to new ones coming down the pike. Everybody who's exporting now, everybody who's under construction, everybody who is authorized, who doesn't have a final investment decision, all can proceed. We are the biggest exporter. We will continue to be exporting, and it will not affect the jobs. It will not affect what is happening already in terms of exports.
Well, our colleague invites us to imagine that there's some kind of categorical ban on exports of liquefied natural gas. and that there's some sort of cutoff taking place. Is there a cutoff?
There is no cutoff. There is no cutoff. We have to do an assessment of what's in the public interest, given the huge amounts that we have authorized.
But that assessment's going forward. It's
The
not
assessment
about
is
any
going
of the
forward.
projects that are currently taking place now, right?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay, so we want to try to restore some sense of proportion and reality to the conversation. I know there's this effort to define your policies bizarrely as a war on energy. Can you just respond to that convoluted rhetorical claim?
Well, I think that the United States right now would be considered energy dominant. We are number one in oil and gas. We are number one in exports, and we are aggressively seeking to be larger in our deployment of renewable energy as well, which is what Congress has given us the authority to do. So we are an energy country, and we will remain an energy exporting country, even as we continue to deploy renewable energy for use at home.
Okay, the ex-president just went before a whole bunch of oil and gas executives and essentially demanded that they give his campaign $1 billion because he was going to release a rash of regulations reversing climate progress and reversing the policies of your administration. He promised to auction off more leases for oil drilling in the Gulf of Mexico and has been repeatedly chanting at rallies, "Drill, baby, drill." What would happen to our climate goals if we actually undertook to reverse all of the progress made under the Biden-Harris administration?
Well, obviously, we want to get to net zero by 2050 as a nation, but also in conjunction with all other nations on the planet who are seeking to address climate change for the reasons that you stated in your opening statement in terms of the number of extreme weather events, which cost us so much more than addressing climate change costs us.
Yeah.
In the end, we have a responsibility to our citizens.
As Secretary of Energy, do you think climate denialism is dangerous to the future of our country?
Of course it is. It's dangerous to us as humans. It's dangerous to our economy as well. The opportunity in clean energy is enormous across the country. So,
And I remember there was a time when the Secretary of Energy would appear to be at odds with the Secretary of the EPA and the people working on environment. But tell us about the inside of the administration. You have these record levels of gas and oil production and other renewable energies moving forward. But do you see your job as opposed to the job of the people who are working to preserve our climate?
not at all. We work in conjunction with the Department of Interior, the EPA. We work together, and we want to make sure that we're producing energy enough to keep the lights on and to keep people moving, but we do it in the cleanest way possible, and we can do both.
Well, thank you for your hard work. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Sessions from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Secretary, welcome. We're delighted that you're here. We've had a series of days where on both sides we ask leading-edge questions, expect leading-edge answers, and on a bipartisan basis, we're delighted that you're here. I've spent the last 10 minutes hearing about how great of a job that the Secretary is doing in education. Tell me about LIHEAP, dumping billions of gallons of crude oil into the Northeast every year. And
Did you say LIHEAP?
LIHEAP.
The low-income heating and...
Right. It uses diesel. That's the federal government's low-income opportunity and answer to keep people warm, poor people. 2008, spike happened. We're putting an increasingly amount of money into this. We're dumping billions of gallons of a home heating fuel into the Northeast rather than going to a clean solution. So you're talking about all these great things that happened, but this government for the last 4 years and President Obama dumped billions of gallons of home heating fuel into the air. And yet you're sitting here talking about what a threat all this is that the energy companies are doing. Why don't you tell us about LIHEAP?
Well, LIHEAP keeps the lights on for poor
I know it
families.
does.
It's a really important safety
I know it
net
is.
for poor
So what
families.
have you done to turn that needle around?
Well, let me
when you're
tell you.
trying to take care, when you want to ban natural gas?
What we want to do is to make sure that poor families have the same ability to
Oh, I agree with
weatherize
that.
their homes, for example, as wealthy people. So one of the programs that's under our jurisdiction
Natural gas is far cheaper,
weatherization. Natural gas is cheap right now. You are very correct.
and it
about
has
that.
been.
But what I'm
And
saying,
it's cleaner, which is your main thesis. All right, Madam Secretary, I'd like to go next. And I want to talk about Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program. And this was designed as an opportunity that Congress gave the Secretary authority and money to innovate for ultra-efficient vehicles. And yet it should contain, based upon the scenarios and the ratios, almost anybody that would qualify based upon their ratio of making cleaner energy. And yet I see where over and over your department is going on the side of EV as opposed to other ideas. Yet we know that electronic vehicles, just ask Avis and Hertz, they can't even get rid of them. The diminishing value, the loss of jobs, the amount of problems that come with these. And yet I see your department giving money, loans, entirely to EV projects as opposed to others that may qualify also. Could you please talk about that?
Well-
Got a minute, 47 seconds, ma'am.
okay, the ATVM program through the Loan Programs Office was directed by Congress. And so, yes, it is encouraging the development of technologies and businesses who are building batteries or who are extracting the critical minerals and processing them for batteries so that the United States is not beholden to other countries, but that we are building our own energy security here in this nation. That's the intent of the Loan Program Office in the vehicle space.
And the amount of percentages or amount given to EV as opposed to other competing ideas?
Well, that particular program is designated largely for advanced vehicles. And so advanced
These
vehicles...
would be advanced vehicles. These would be people who've offered a loan,
That
but it's
would-
not EV.
It might be a fuel cell, for example.
Could be.
We're also interested in that. We're not foreclosing any of that. We are looking at emissions reductions.
Good. Well, I'd like to follow up with you and politely to ask that you provide me the information about the amount of people who have brought under this vehicle program, manufacturing program, and ultra vehicles, and to find out what percent that you have given in the amount of money to EVs versus other applicants that may have come under that, saying for a vehicle, not a battery, for the vehicle, and I'd appreciate knowing that. I want to thank you for taking time with us today, and we will be following up on this LIHEAP issue to find out specifically what DOE thinks about this hundreds of billions of gallons of diesel being spewed into the Northeast on an annual basis. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Norton from Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Granholm, in the time since President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law, communities across the country are already benefiting from historic investments in clean energy and climate resilience. In fact, right here in the District of Columbia that I represent, the Inflation Reduction Act is enabling the General Services Administration to upgrade federal government buildings from fossil fuel steam power to electric heat pump technology. The upgrades to the Ronald Reagan Building and the International Trade Center alone will strengthen our climate future and are expected to save more than $6.2 million in taxpayer dollars every year. So, Secretary Granholm, how are projects like this one transforming communities across the country?
We are very interested in all projects that are community-based, by the way, that reduce costs for people. And so whether it is energy efficiency or the generation of clean energy and giving people the ability to take control of their own energy future in partnership with communities and on an individual basis. So we are all in on all manner of efficiency and energy and supporting communities in doing so.
Both the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law are critical investments in our country's future. Within the first year of the Inflation Reduction Act's enactment, we added 170,000 new jobs in clean energy and climate resilience, with a projection of more than 1.5 million additional new jobs over the next decade. Secretary Granholm, how has President Biden's investing in America, in America's energy, created new jobs and opportunities across the country, including the energy sector?
Yep, to your point, so far it's about 800,000 jobs that have been created as a result of the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, with the projection that it will be 1.5 million. We've created over 15 million jobs. Over 15 million jobs have been created since this president took office, more than any president in any term in American history. And part of that has to do with the focus on clean energy and the opportunity that it brings to employ people.
According to the Department of Energy, because of the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, by 2030, we are projected to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 40% at 2005 levels. It is also projected that clean energy electricity will account for 80% of the power generation by 2030, compared with 42% in 2022. In addition, President Biden's leadership will help families save up to $38 billion in electricity bills by the end of the decade. So, Senator Granholm, how have the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law enabled the Department of Energy to invest in clean energy and fossil fuel alternatives?
It's the statistics that you cite are so wonderful because they happen to be accurate, and that 40% reduction in CO2 emissions, it's actually 40 to 50% if you include what the private sector is doing and what other states are doing. What these laws have done is enabled both the federal government but also the private sector to really do the investments, because they contain carrots, and we're all about the carrots at the Department of Energy. So the grants from the bipartisan infrastructure law and the tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act have created an environment where America has become the irresistible nation for investment in clean energy. We are the envy of other nations for having been so forward-leaning on creating jobs here. So it's a very exciting time for both responsiveness to addressing climate change, but also creating jobs in America.
I'm proud we passed the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, and I'm thankful for the Biden administration's leadership in addressing the climate crisis and securing our country's energy future, and I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Biggs from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, thank you for being here. When you talked about net zero by 2050, you're talking essentially about eliminating all hydrocarbon-based fuel. Is that correct?
Net zero suggests that it is also using some hydrocarbon-based fuel, but it has been decarbonized.
Can you name the benefits of fossil fuel in and of itself?
Can I name?
As an energy source?
Well, it is dense, and it keeps the lights on, keeps transportation going. It's an important part of our energy mix.
It's cheap, it's reliable, it's abundant, it's predictable, it's distributable, right?
It's all of that, and it needs to be cleaned.
And so when you have benefits to the overall benefits, when you talk about net zero and when our climate friends, they don't really include the personal benefits or the economic benefits. Can you name some economic benefits that come from fossil fuels?
Well, clearly our economy has been built upon fossil fuels. Our economy is driven by fossil fuels, but fossil fuels have also created an enormous problem, which is climate change, and that's impacting individuals and economies too, so let's clean it up.
Let's talk about some other things. With fossil fuels, you saw a dramatic increase over the last 130 years of longevity and mortality rates. Is that correct? That's
Yes.
true, right?
Yes.
You also saw a dramatic increase in sanitation and health impacts that were good, right?
Well, I wouldn't know that I would attribute that directly to fossil fuels, but yes, we have seen an
They
increase
certainly
in
provided-
longevity, increase in health.
So most,
Maybe
with the number of
despite-
petroleum-based products that you have out there, it affects virtually every aspect of your life, whether what you're wearing, your health the apparatuses that you use, all of those come from petroleum-based products, right?
Petroleum-based products impact every aspect of our economy.
So PJM Interconnection, the nation's largest grid operator, released a report finding that the amount of generation retirement appears to be more certain than the timely arrival of replacement generation resources. What they're really getting at there is that we're reducing reliable energy resources before reliable sources come online. And that's really what we see happening, and that's the anticipation. That's why some states talk about rolling brownouts that are coming their way. They're very concerned about that, as am I. Let's talk for just a second about electric vehicles, if we can. So the funding came in the IRA and the federal budget estimated. Let me get this right here. In the 117th Congress, we passed the IRA. My Democrats colleagues did anyway, and they provided. CBO and JCT estimated that the eliminate spending and tax breaks would cost around $400 billion by moving to electric vehicles, commercial electric vehicles, heavy-duty electric vehicles, tax credit for residential charging equipment, and $3 billion for postal fleet electrification. That was, they estimated that would have a net of $400 billion cost. Since that bill has passed, now for those same programs, the estimate is that the subsidies will be $1.1 trillion over the same period of time. Now, of that, $7.5 billion was generated for nationwide electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and yet it's been reported that we have now have 4 charging stations, I believe it is, and that was reported by NBC. Does that sound accurate to you?
No, it doesn't.
Well, tell me how many
Yeah,
new charging facilities do we have? I'm sorry, 7? 7. There's been 7 built in 4 states.
So let me just explain this. The National Electric Vehicle Initiative required states to develop a plan in order to be eligible for that $7.5 billion. All states did. We approved all of those plans. All of the funding has been released to the states. These are all state programs. So now 36 states have released solicitations to be able to build out those charging stations. 22 states have announced awards. There will be an additional 2,000 stations built by the end of 2024.
You're guaranteeing that there's going to be 2,000 EV stations?
That is what we forecast.
And that's your forecast. And the result is you're putting those in, the taxpayers are putting those in. All of these are taxpayer subsidized, and yet Ford can't even sell their cars. Most of these lots can't sell them. I would like to introduce into the record the article where Ford is announcing massive losses of $1.3 billion that they're losing on an average $132,000 for every EV that they sell.
Without objection to order.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognize Mr. Lynch from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Madam Secretary. Good to see you. Thank you for all your good work.
Thank you.
Just really quick on LIHEAP. Look, LIHEAP, the reason we have to give people low-cost heating oils because a lot of poor folk have oil-fired furnaces, right? That's why we're doing that.
Yes, unfortunately, but that's why we're working so hard to weatherize and to update people's homes so that they don't
Exactly.
have to do
We have a whole, and we're working with the gas company actually to try to modernize some of these furnaces and make it a cleaner energy source. So I appreciate the work you're doing on that. Really interested in reshoring some of the energy supply chain back to the United States. There's a a grant that we put in the bipartisan infrastructure law that allows battery materials, so EV batteries, all the components that go into that. We want to bring that home. So right now, there's one U.S. company that's competing for that grant. They're headquartered in my district, Cabot Corporation, but they do all their manufacturing in Texas and in Michigan. So that's where the jobs would be created. But they do great work. They're the only U.S. company bidding for this, and I just want to, put a stake in the ground, put a flag in the ground on that for you to take a good hard look at that. It's been a while. It's been a while.
What is the name of the company?
Cabot Corporation, and they're a U.S. Based company. They do their work here, and they create carbon nanotubes and other things that go inside these batteries. So I'm just flagging that for you, if you could look at that. Thirdly, so myself, Mr. Connolly, and some others, Mr. Raskin, put in $3 billion for the post office to electrify their fleet. The post office has something like 237,000 vehicles. It's the second largest, after Department of Defense, they're the second largest owner of vehicles in the United States. We put $3 billion to help them convert to electric vehicles. I talked to Postmaster General DeJoy. He's doing it as fast as he can, but they're doing with the resources that we gave them, and we need to do this faster. When you think about this is a wonderful opportunity for us to accelerate and amplify the use of electric vehicles. Think about the pattern in which the post office uses their vehicles. They charge them overnight. They use them in the morning. They deliver during the day, and then they come back and charge overnight. Those charging stations, if we had charging stations at every post office that were available to the public completely during the day, and the post offices are everywhere. There's an opportunity here, but we got to deploy the charging stations. They're close to everybody's homes. We have, General Mail facilities that could house hundreds of these charging stations. We could use them for our postal fleet overnight when nobody's using them, and then we could offer them to the public perhaps during the day. And it would, I just think it would give a real boost to the use of EVs, the ease of which needs to be enhanced.
Yep.
Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100%. We're interested in seeing 500,000 charging stations across the country at all locations that are easy, but even in some of the locations where you haven't seen a big uptake in electric vehicles, like in rural areas, which is why postal services are everywhere, and they are a great example of what we'd like to see happen. We have now 180,000 charging stations across the country, 180,000. The goal is to get to 500 by 2030, and the private sector has stepped up a lot, but that's why the states are looking to fill in the gaps where charging stations don't exist, every 50 miles along transportation corridors, for example.
Great, thank you. I have 45 seconds left. So there's a program that we're bidding on in New England. It's called Power Up New England. So it's a combination with us and all Massachusetts and all the other New England states. It would allow us to repurpose Braden Point and one of the other power plants in our area in southeastern Massachusetts and connect them to the wind turbines that we've got going offshore. So it's a joint program. We've got facilities in southern Connecticut, Maine, northern Maine, and that's really, really, really important to us. If we're going to convert, that's a heavily populated area in New England, and we've got to upgrade our grid. So that's the Power Up New England program that Eversource and others are pushing. So just ask you to take a good hard look at that as well. Okay. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your courtesy, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Perry from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, appreciate you being here answering questions for us. I've got a letter here from the PJM regarding the Brandon Shores Power Facility in Anne Arundel County, and I'm just going to read from it. According to the PJM interconnection spokesman, the PJM region and the state of Maryland are facing future reliability challenges as a result of the announced retirement of Brandon Shores units. Specifically, PJM analysis showed that the deactivation of the Brandon Shores unit would cause severe voltage drop and thermal violations across 7 PJM zones, which would lead to widespread reliability risk in Baltimore and the immediate surrounding area. So let me make that plain for everybody. Brandon Shores, owned by Talon Energy, has entered into an agreement with the Sierra Club to not produce power, And so the PJM, which operates in multiple states and schedules the power from various facilities, is asking that that agreement be held in abeyance until a reliable source can be built. But they're not going to do that. And the only thing that's going to save Baltimore from blacking out, from going without power, right, is an emergency designation from the Secretary and the Department of Energy. There's not enough time, even if we wanted to build it, and we don't. And let me be clear here. The alternative is that Pennsylvania, where I live, provides the power, and our land is taken by eminent domain to send the power to Baltimore, who has a perfectly functioning power plant right now in Anne Arundel County. But because of the agreement, they're going to shut it down. So my two questions to start with for this are, is the Department of Energy in support of these type of agreements between the Sierra Club like this, between the Sierra Club and Talon Energy to shut down plants, number one? And number two, are you committed to the emergency declaration that's going to be required when the plant shuts down for over 1 million customers to have power and live in the 21st century?
Well, I'm not familiar with that agreement. I'd have to take a look at it. We certainly want to make sure that power stays on and that we add additional power to make sure that there's enough for people. So that's why we're working so hard to ensure that we are deploying
clean energy
solutions.
Ma'am, I have the letter. I assure you it is real, and it is dated December 5th of 2023. So it's not new. It's not a new concept. This is coming. And so assuming, let's just do it this way. I don't want to assume on your behalf, but assuming this is valid, you can see the logo up there. We'll have it entered into the record. I'll stake my reputation on what the PJM has offered. Assuming that is correct, are you willing to commit to an emergency declaration so that the lights and the power can stay on for 1 million customers? It's going to require the Department of Energy.
Yeah, we're always willing to exercise emergency authority if lights are going out.
Do you think it's fair that the people of Pennsylvania have to watch their land chewed up to send power to Baltimore when they've got a perfectly well-operating facility? Is that fair that we do that? And the facility can be transitioned. It's coal now. I know everybody hates coal. I do not, but a lot of people do. I'm sure there are scrubbers on the plant, and the requirements just keep on increasing such that the plant can no longer remain viable economically under the conditions that the federal government has set. But is it fair that Pennsylvania then has to provide the power and the transmission across its land for Baltimore?
I think there are other solutions, though. I think that the
I think there are too, and I hope we can pursue them.
But
I hope we can pursue them. I appreciate that, Madam Secretary. In the little bit of time I have left, Representative Biggs talked about the loss of money to the car companies. Ford is delaying introduction of its all-new electric SUV. It lost $130,000 on every EV. The division will lose $5.5 billion in 2024. Tesla saw an 8.5% decline in deliveries. GM lost $1.7 billion in Q4 of 2023. This is all happening at taxpayer expense. The increase in EV usage and sales is wholly by the federal government, right? It's not because the private sector is actually declining. And so with that, while you're here, as a current cabinet secretary, would you commit to saying on the record that you will not support a bailout of the car companies once we bankrupt them, once these policies, that's where we're headed, ma'am. We've already done this before. It cost us $81 billion in 2014. What will you commit to today regarding the car companies are going to go bankrupt based on these requirements from the federal government?
car companies do not say they are going bankrupt.
When they do. when they do.
They are excited about the trajectory of electric
They
vehicle
don't
sales
seem
into the
excited
future.
to me from,
They are continuing with their plans. They may have slowed them a little, but they are continuing with their plans to
because
build
they're
electric
forced to by the
vehicles
federal government.
because there's a 30% increase year over year in demand for electric vehicles.
Only by the federal government, ma'am.
by
Madam
individuals
Secretary.
out there who want to save money as they drive.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And gentleman's time's expired. Before I recognize Ms. Bush, did you have something, gentlemen, you were wanting to enter into the record?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to enter this order from the PJM to must produce power to Brandon Shores and Allen Energy.
Without objection,
Thank
so
you,
ordered.
Chair.
Now, Chair recognizes Ms. Bush from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Granholm, it's good to see you again, and thank you so much for speaking with me at length when you were in the St. Louis area the last time about these issues. St. Louis and I are here today to discuss the climate crisis, of course, and the need for clean energy, as well as the devastating impact of nuclear waste created and completely abandoned by the federal government that continues to devastate my community to this day. And we know you weren't in this seat at the time. I just want to say that. Secretary, as you know, Black and brown communities are on the front lines of the climate crisis, and we have been the most impacted by the failure of the government to clean up toxic waste. And also, it is essential that while we prioritize the transition to clean energy, we also address the legacy of the pollution in our communities. World War II is still killing people in my district. For over 80 years, we have been grappling with the nuclear contamination left over from the Manhattan Project, particularly in Coldwater Creek, which is a main waterway central to our community, as well as Westlake Landfill. In March of this year, the Senate passed legislation that would reauthorize the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, or better known as RECA, which provides health screenings and compensation for people sickened by the U.S. testing of nuclear weapons, as well as expanded to include St. Louis and other areas that have been historically excluded. But now we're running out of time in the House. RECA is currently set to expire on June the 7th. We only have 4 legislative days left. Secretary Granholm, do you support the reauthorization of RECA?
Yes.
Thank you. Could you tell us what impact would a lapse in RECA cause on our victims?
Well, I think it is critical that the United States take responsibility for the fallout of its activities in World War II on humans, no matter where they are. And unfortunately, in a lot of our cleanup communities, it takes a long time to eradicate all remnants of radiation. So we have a responsibility as a nation, and I hope we live up to that responsibility.
Thank you. And thank you for listening when you and I had such a deep conversation about this, and thank you for your desire for action. I know that if we do not extend and expand RECA, victims will continue to suffer, and I've seen my community members, I've actually know some who have died. But while RECA is key to making our communities whole, we also must do the work to actually clean up the waste. I recognize that a lot of the cleanup has been dumped on the Army Corps, but I'd like to ask you about this as well. We often hear a lot about the purported benefits of nuclear energy, painting it as the clean alternative to fossil fuels. Madam Secretary, how is the department ensuring that the new waste by nuclear energy is handled and disposed of properly?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We are in the middle of a site-based process, a community-based siting process for nuclear waste. Currently, as you're aware, for civil nuclear waste is largely stored around those plants, which is safe, but it would be very helpful to the United States to have a national repository of nuclear waste that is safe. We're in the process of this consent-based siting effort. There has been 12 entities that have been funded to reach out to communities who are potentially going to raise their hand and to decide how to compensate those communities for doing that service for our nation. That process is in the middle. It takes a bit of time. We're modeling it after a couple of other nations that did the same thing. It takes a bit of time to ensure that we get it right, but we are in the process of doing that, and we hope that we'll come out with a community or communities that are willing to do that.
Thank you, thank you. So, and I appreciate that the community is also involved in these decisions. That's really important. When we spoke in person during your visit to the St. Louis area, we spoke about the cleanup specifically in St. Louis. And as you know, the Army Corps is the cleanup administrator for these sites. Madam Secretary, how can I work with you to follow up on your commitment to work with the Army Corps of Engineers to get a jobs training program funded by DOE to train members of our community to expedite the cleanup of the Manhattan Project waste throughout my district?
Let's you and I follow up on that together.
Okay, okay. I sincerely appreciate the Department of Energy's effort to ensure that this cleanup happens, and communities like mine, the people depend on it. So thank you for your work, and I look forward to working with you.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Burchett from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, Tennessee is a massive hub for nuclear energy. Is the Biden administration supportive of new nuclear deployment, especially the small modular reactors?
We are.
And can you tell me how y'all are helping with that deployment?
We thank very much Congress's funding in the '24 budget for small modular reactors, as well as the approval to be able to advance nuclear reactors, different designs. We've got about $12 billion that we are funding nuclear writ large, including the uranium strategy and the HALEU strategy that will be the fuel for the small modular reactors.
Can you give me a timeline? They keep telling me 10 years before those are rolled out, and that was about 5 years ago.
Well, I sure hope not. I know the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has approved a design of one of the small modular reactors and others that are in the mix. That's the first step, of course. But we are eager to partner with utilities, the tech community, who are obviously going to be needing clean baseload power and could have small modular reactors attached to, for example, data centers. That kind of strategy, we're
Do you have a
eager.
timeline? Could you give me a date
Well,
when we're going to see? We're
it
going to
depends
turn the
on
switch on one of these.
Here's what we'd like to see is that the utilities step up to be able to do this, because it's the utilities who want to do it. But it's not certainly not the federal government that's holding it back.
Let me switch gears. What is the responsibility of the Federal Protective Services within the Nuclear Security Administration?
Are you talking about transporting fuels?
No, ma'am. I want you to speak. Well, I was going to follow up with the numerous reports by the Federal Protective Services officers describing suspicious occurrences of UAPs over nuclear facilities.
Let me just say, the Defense Department has said there is no evidence of UFOs, et cetera, or aliens in the United States. However, at those sites, there may be drones that may be nefarious. And so we are definitely looking at that and making sure that our national security sites are protected. We have a whole program related to countering drones that may be coming from
Well, this isn't about drones, and this is prior to drones even. What protocols does the Department of Energy have for reporting and responding to any UAP sightings near nuclear infrastructure? And people joke about this, but I get a lot of questions about this concerning this and about this hearing today from my constituents, so I would appreciate you answering that if there are any protocols.
Well, certainly there are protocols whenever we see anything unusual around our nuclear sites or our national security sites writ large.
Okay. I'm going to switch gears. The proper use of the reserve is the proper use of the reserve, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in particular, considering its intended purpose is to provide an emergency stockpile of crude oil to protect against significant supply distributions from war or natural disasters. Is that the proper use of that reserve?
It is.
Okay. Should the U.S. face, if say the U.S. were to face an actual military threat, how would you describe our ability to respond to extreme energy disruptions?
We would have an ability to respond. We have the largest reserve in the world right now.
Okay. What's your strategy to help lower the prices at the gas pump without robbing our emergency reserves? seems we do these things around election times, and I
No,
think both parties
the
are
reason
guilty.
why barrels were sold from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in 2022 was because Russia invaded Ukraine and there was a disruption in global supply. That emergency caused the president to release barrels so that he could temper that global supply disruption, including asking our allies from around the world to do the same, which they did.
How many of our military bases in Europe depend on or utilize Russian energy?
Our bases in Europe?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not aware.
Okay, good deal. Under your leadership, the Department of Energy has targeted gas stoves, washing machines, refrigerators, and clothes dryers based on what was called unquantified benefits related to climate and public health. How do you balance the meager, unquantified benefits of these rules with the massive cost burdens imposed on American manufacturers and consumers?
First of all, they are quantified. Americans will save $2 trillion in energy savings because their appliances are more efficient. We're required to do that under...
Yes, ma'am, but poor folks have to, when they do this, they have to buy these things. I think we're taking that, and I know the corporations love it when y'all put these new rules and regulations in, ma'am, but I really wished we had a little more time, and I wish you would show up when we ask you to. I think that shows a lot of arrogance, and Tennesseans are reminded of this leadership every time they go to the pump. And you all should be ashamed, I think, for your lack of accountability to Congress by not showing up when you're asked. I mean, we had to threaten you with a subpoena just to get y'all here. So I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Brown from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Granholm, it is great to see you again. I'm glad we had the chance to hear about, a couple of weeks ago, the Biden-Harris administration's historic efforts to invest in diverse and disadvantaged communities as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the CHIPS and Science Act, which I was proud to help pass these bills into law under the leadership of Speaker Pelosi and President Biden, which are already making a difference in the communities across the country, including my district. Last year, the East Cleveland City School District received $100,000 under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to make critical energy upgrades to lower energy use and costs, improve indoor air quality, and promote healthier learning environments. I would like to thank you firsthand for that investment in Ohio's 11th Congressional District. Now, Secretary Granholm, can you share with us the size and scale of the investments the Biden-Harris administration has been implementing since these laws were passed, and specifically how they have brought investment and opportunity to disadvantaged, low-income, and marginalized communities?
Great. Thank you so much for the question, and thank you for raising the Renew America's Schools program. Way oversubscribed, I will say. If Congress has anything to consider into the future, we need to provide more school districts in disadvantaged communities the ability to upgrade their schools because it was so successful. The Department of Energy, under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, is responsible for about $98 billion worth of funds to be able to make our nation more energy independent and have our energy run cleaner. We have, as a result, given out grants, and they've taken advantage of tax credits too, to companies that are producing the products to get us there. As we give out grants, we want to make sure that all communities benefit. So we require for any business that is seeking a grant to do a community benefits agreement, so that shows how they are employing the local community, how they are benefiting the local community, and it is an agreement. So we are monitoring and we are enforcing those agreements, and as a result, we're seeing that double the amount of job creation and benefits are going to disadvantaged communities than the rest of the population relative to size. So we're excited about that, and we're excited about, thank you, the incentives that have been built into the tax credits to locate in disadvantaged communities, because that too is causing great, much more investment in communities that might not have seen it otherwise.
Thank you so much. And as we continue our transition to a clean energy economy, I want to touch on one point in the National Blueprint for Transportation Decarbonization, which you put forward along with Ohio's 11th's very own former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Marcia Fudge, and and Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Michael Regan. This blueprint highlights the need for investments and expansion of electric vehicle charging stations. These stations must be constructed, distributed, and built equitably, prioritizing low-income and underserved communities. Since nearly every major auto manufacturer, from GM to Ford to Jeep, has plans to expand and convert to fully electric fleets within the next decade, along with other vehicles like school buses and postal vans. We cannot leave these communities behind with this vital aspect of energy security and access to transportation. So, Secretary Granholm, can you speak to how the Biden-Harris administration is supporting construction of charging stations for marginalized communities?
Yes, thank you so much. The $7.5 billion that Congress approved under the bipartisan infrastructure law for charging includes a significant component to go to communities that don't have access to charging right now, particularly in cities, particularly poor communities, particularly rural communities, places where the private sector has not yet built out charging stations. And so the challenge for all of that, so for example, if it's in a dense urban environment, where do you put the chargers? What if people don't have garages or access to a garage? What if they are in an apartment building? All of those questions, as a business model, we're trying to figure out how to incentivize access to charging stations in an easy way. Of course, putting them in parking lots that are available to the public is one thing, but along street parking, can you create chargers that you pull down from the street lamps, for example? Are there other ways, creative ways, to use technology to be able to give people access to charging? So the bottom line is we want charging to be ubiquitous. We want it to be accessible by everybody.
Thank you so much. Even my Republican colleagues who did not vote for these groundbreaking bills continue to take credit for the investments they are bringing to every corner and every sector of our country and economy. This is a testament to the value and need for these unprecedented and historic Biden-Harris and Democratic-led investments in the American people, the economy, and our future. And with that, I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Donalds from Florida.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Granholm, real quick, on January 18th of 2024, House Oversight held a hearing called The Next Generation Empowering America's Nuclear Energy. I submitted several questions to be answered at a later date. The NRC and FERC have both responded, but the DOE has not. Do you have a commitment? Are you going to commit to responding to my questions over the next 30 days?
I'm not sure about over the next 30 days, but definitely we will commit to responding to your questions. I know it's in a review process, but we're also happy to sit and with you in person and brief too on answers, but it is in a review process right now.
Madam Secretary, this was January. It is now May.
Yep.
You got 4 or 5 people sitting behind you. What other review processes do you need to answer just one member's
believe it or not,
questions
it's
from
beyond
Congress?
them. It's
Oh, I know it's beyond them. Let's move on. Let's talk spent nuclear fuel.
Yeah.
We have roughly 88 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel. It's for the people watching this hearing, it's basically takes up the size of one Olympic pool. Many countries, including France, one of our great friends and partners around the globe, they have invested in recycling spent nuclear fuel now. And the amount of spent nuclear fuel we have in the United States, we could power the United States for roughly 400 years. Is the DOE actually going through and exploring recycling spent nuclear fuel rods instead of the constant conversation and dogma about nuclear waste that is present in the United States? Do you think recycling spent rods is actually in the nation's interest?
I do, and we are looking at that, and I'm excited that you're interested in it as well, because I think that's a program that we should continue to fund.
All right, so when you say interested, what does that mean?
It means we've got labs that are working on the research related to it. I know that we've funded a couple of companies as well that are also doing that. We think that it is an important aspect of how we deal with nuclear waste.
Okay. All right, good. I want to follow up with you on that because we should be using all that stuff at our disposal. I'm glad that my colleague from Tennessee, Mr. Burchett, spent time with you talking about modular reactors and microreactors, so I'm not going to go down that line. I think it's important for the American people to understand that the future of baseload power in the United States, from everything from AI, quantum, digital assets, to our current needs from an energy apparatus, we are going to need massive amounts of baseload power. And wouldn't you agree that solar panels and wind turbines are not going to be able to fulfill that need?
Well, if you add batteries, they become more baseload-like, but certainly I'm not saying that one has to be at the expense of another. I think both can happen.
Secretary, I think you would agree that battery technology really has not changed that much since the Duracell.
Oh,
and
it has,
capacity
sir.
hasn't
It
changed
really
that much.
has.
I
We can
think you
have
would
a
agree with
conversation about that. It
All right.
definitely has changed.
I want to go back to a colleague with the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, because he went down a line of questioning with you about the administration's pause on liquid natural gas. For decades, the Department of Energy's position on liquefied natural gas has been that it is safe, it is clean, and it is actually in the nation's interest for it to be procured and then also used in the United States and obviously transported and traded around the globe. In short, what has changed at the Department of Energy?
Yeah, the only thing that has changed is that the volumes that have increased so much, we need to take another look. It's not that the ones that have been approved are not in the nation's interest. They were and they are, and they're going to continue to operate. It's the question of how much more new expansion and what will be the impact in the United States. So if we export our natural gas, what does that do for, if we export, we produce right now about 100 BCF of natural gas, a little bit more. If we export the amount that's authorized currently, which is 48 BCF, that's about half. What does that do to prices at home? That's a question.
Let me ask you this question. Do you believe that just in basic supply and demand that more supply on the market actually decreases prices? And wouldn't a decreased price actually be to the benefit of the public interest?
For sure it would be.
So then what are we talking about, Secretary?
So this is what we have to look at. So one of the questions that we are looking at, we also have to take a look at what it does for global supply, our allies, all of that.
And again, this is a good conversation, but you know, congressional hearings, our time's limited.
Yes, sir.
Considering what is happening right now in Ukraine, isn't it in the public's interest here in the United States to increase exports of liquefied natural gas to cut down the ability of the Russian regime to actually earn money in the open market?
We are exporting natural gas. We are not stopping that.
Hold on, Secretary, hold on a minute. I'm gonna reclaim my time because I got 18 seconds now. We're not in a debate. This is a hearing, but you have put a pause. And you're saying it's in the public interest, but you can't really identify what the public interest is because it's in the public's interest for prices to go down. It is in the American public interest to try to limit the ability of the Russian regime to earn more money on the open market with their resources. Wouldn't you agree with that?
The pause does not affect that. Everything is still going forward.
The price does affect their ability to earn money to wage war, Madam Secretary. You know that just like I do.
It does not right now. This pause is for a brief period of time to update a study. It doesn't
How long is the
affect
pause?
any of that. It will be finished.
I would argue, Madam Secretary, that the pause that you are doing is against the law because you have not finalized your parameters and what you're looking at. And any events of that being finalized, you do need to execute the permits that are waiting. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Kassar from Texas.
Thank you, Chairman. Madam Secretary, first want to thank you for your strong leadership at the Department of Energy. Today I want to talk a little bit with you about the broken and disconnected Texas grid, ERCOT, not just on behalf of Texans, but also because of the national implications of not fixing the Texas grid. I want to start off by thanking you and the Department of Energy for putting millions of dollars towards electric reliability in Texas, including a recent $30 million investment to help keep the lights on in San Antonio, Texas. But we still have a long way to go. We have had so many mass power outages, in fact, hundreds of mass power outages over the last few years in Texas, making us one of the most unreliable electric grids in the country. And most people remember and think about this as it relates to Winter Storm Uri, where over 10 million Texans lost power, hundreds of people died, and in the wake of that storm, you, Madam Secretary, said many things I agree with. You said that interconnecting Texas's grid would be great for Texas. It would be great for Texas to consider connecting to its neighbors. You said that interconnecting Texas could also benefit the rest of the country because in good times, Texas is generating all sorts of clean energy, which we could send those clean ions out from Texas to take advantage of a market that is eager to accept it, and couldn't agree more. That's why I introduced the Connect the Grid Act, which would require Texas to interconnect with its neighbors. My office worked with your department to draft this legislation, and we relied heavily on your excellent transmission needs study, which pinpoints our nation's most significant transmission needs and identifies national interest electric transmission corridors known as NITSEs. Just last week, the Department of Energy announced its preliminary list of NITSEs, a designation that's really important because it unlocks federal financing for transmission. But Texas was missing from your list, and that was confusing to me because you and I agree that interconnecting Texas provides reliability, could save American lives, save tons of money, is an economic winner, and we can't reach our climate goals without interconnecting the grid. That's in part because Texas leads the country in wind generation. We're only second to California in solar generation. An upcoming MIT study finds that between 9 gigawatts and 36 gigawatts of interconnection between Texas and its neighbors could get us a 4% CO2 reduction nationwide and a 33% CO2 reduction in the state of Texas. And so in the next few weeks, I want to send a letter to your department urging you to do everything you can to interconnect the Texas grid, whether that's through funding transmission or through transmission planning and more. And I'm interested from hearing from you, Madam Secretary, if you're considering adding Texas to your final list of NHTSA designations, where does Texas fit into your transmission planning?
Great. Thanks for that. Thanks for your leadership on this. I think one of the NHTSAs covers the panhandle of Texas, but you're right, it does not connect to ERCOT. And I stand by saying, of course, this is Texas's call, and so respect state sovereignty on this. But I do think that, when you consider the ability for a neighboring state to help in a time of crisis, and there's more and more of these extreme weather events that are happening and stressing grids, I think the nation would love that. And similarly, for those developers who are in Texas and who want to take advantage of the economy of clean energy to be able to export that power, I think would be good for Texas too. But that's just me. I'm just the Secretary of Energy. I'm not in Texas, and I'm not running Texas. So I look forward to working with you to see how we might be able to get there. But I do think it would be important to create a national grid that would include Texas at some point.
I appreciate that. And there already are interconnections, some minimal interconnections in and out of Texas. Yeah. And there's actually huge market demand to make further interconnections. It's just oftentimes that the politics has gotten in the way of the state interest and the national interest. And I would argue that this isn't just a Texas issue in that neighboring states badly need the power, and Texas has to be a part of the solution. In the meantime, between here and full interconnection, are there any other actions that DOE could take to enhance grid reliability or that kind of transmission in and out of the state?
Well, grid reliability, yes. We obviously, thanks to Congress, have this Grid Resilience Innovation Program, which we are funding to make sure that all states have the ability to access clean power and upgrade their grids. We're really interested as well in funding things like advanced grid technologies, grid-enhancing technologies like advanced conductoring, dynamic line rating, et cetera, which would make it more efficient for energy to be transmitted across grids. In the connectivity part, though, I would hope that in the next round of NHTSAs, we could have this conversation about actually a firm connection to Texas. But again, we do respect how the state views this, and perhaps things will have changed at that point.
I think that the vast majority of Texans would agree that grid connection and fixing the grid should overcome those sort of smaller level politics. So I appreciate your time, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Ms. Luna from Florida.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Granholm, earlier when Representative Burchett asked you about some UAP stuff, you said that the DoD essentially had denied any existence of that, and you referred to them as drones, correct?
It's my understanding that the Department of Defense has looked at this and issued a report about it.
I have a lot of questions, so just quick and concise if possible. There have been persistent claims and reports, including those from credible whistleblowers to this committee, suggesting that the U.S. government, potentially including the Department of Energy, has been involved in reverse engineering technologies recovered from UAP. For example, the Pentagon's proposed Kona Blue program aimed at reverse engineering such technologies, although it was ultimately not established. Can you clarify whether the Department of Energy has been involved in any such efforts, or, either historically or currently, to analyze reverse engineering materials from related to UAPs?
I have no knowledge of that.
Okay, there are several reports indicated frequent drone incursions over DOE nuclear facilities, including an incident on April 1st, 2021 at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, also known as LLNL. Can you detail the DOE's current security measures to prevent unauthorized drone activities or UAPs, and what steps are being taken to enhance these measures of frequencies of incidences?
Yeah, we have a whole counter drone effort to make sure that all of our national security sites and our labs are protected from incursions from drones, I'll just say, that are not authorized. So there's a whole series of protocols, probably not ripe for discussion in this public setting.
Correct. So I reviewed some unclassified materials from around the 40s and 50s, and so they weren't just being reported as drones back then, and I encourage you to look over those materials because I think that you guys should be upgrading that program to cover down on UAPs. There have been documented sightings of metallic spheres over DOE facilities, if you want to call them drones in this instance, such as one report on April 30th, 2019 over LLNL. What investigations have been conducted in regards to these sightings, and what conclusions do you guys have about the nature and origins of these objects?
I'm happy to follow up with you on that.
Okay, we'll be submitting also too for public record some questions after this, if you could please answer those. Considering the DOE's involvement in nuclear and sensitive research facilities, how does the DOE coordinate with agencies like the Department of Defense and AARO to investigate UAP sightings?
We obviously are teamed with the Department of Defense because of our national security and nuclear mission.
Are you able to cite any specific investigations or shared data analysis efforts?
I don't have information on that.
Okay. As of right now, again, we'll be submitting some questions for you after this, but I hope that you guys can answer those in a timely fashion. And again, for those that might be tuning into this, I would encourage you to look at some of those unclassified materials, and we'll be happy to provide your office with that. I'll just follow up by one other question, I guess, to close it out. Does the DOE currently work with JSOC in order to handle security measures?
We work with all of the security entities around the federal government. We're part of an overall all-of-government effort on both cyber as well as national security.
Do you guys work with JSOC? Yes or no?
Yes, we do.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, ma'am. I yield the rest of my time, Chairman.
Would the gentlelady yield your remaining time? Madam Secretary, what's the exact position of this administration with respect to nuclear?
We are in favor of nuclear power.
What has the Biden administration identified communities that are welcome to nuclear? There are communities around America that would welcome nuclear. I represent one, Paducah. There are communities that I don't think would be very receptive to nuclear. Does the administration have a database of communities? I mean, you could say you're for it, but is it a sincere support of nuclear?
Yes, we're investing huge amounts in nuclear power, in advancing small modular reactors, advanced nuclear reactors. We are supporting them with Congress's help. We firmly believe that nuclear is an important part of our trajectory
What's the
to get to net
timeline?
zero. It's now. I mean, we are always encouraging utilities. For example, Vogtle, as you're probably aware, has just turned on its 4th unit. We're very supportive of that. It was through the Loan Program Office that was made possible.
With respect to that, Louisville, or what about coal? What's the exact position of the administration with respect to coal? Because there's still an effort to continue to shut down more coal-fired plants. I personally believe that coal needs to be in the entire energy portfolio in America. I represent a huge coal-producing district. We also have a lot of coal-fired facilities left in Kentucky that have uncertain futures. What's the position on coal?
I mean, obviously, coal burns and has a huge CO2 footprint, and so
clean coal.
Well, is there a good clean coal? We're excited to be able to continue to pursue that. We've been looking at all sorts of technologies through our National Energy Technology Lab on coal and how you can capture and sequester the CO2. We know that a lot of coal plants are shutting down because of economics, not because of the regulatory footprint. But we also, we also want to help energy communities to be able to produce the power for the next 100 years too. And that's why a lot of the incentives that have been adopted by Congress and that we are implementing are to put facilities on those coal plants that would, for example, nuclear facilities on coal plants would enable us to be able to continue to employ those workers and power our nation for the future.
My time's expired. I'll have some more questions later. Chair recognizes Mr. Presley.
Thank you for joining us, Madam Secretary. Always a pleasure. The climate crisis is real. The planet isn't warming, as many experts have cited. The planet is burning. It is on fire. And the Department of Energy is essential to mitigating its harms while ensuring a healthy environment with clean air for all. Policymakers at all levels of government have a responsibility to do everything we can to transition from dirty fossil fuels. That's why I was really pleased to partner with the City of Cambridge in my district, the Massachusetts 7th, to deliver $1 million in federal funding to create publicly available and community accessible electric vehicle charging stations. Madam Secretary, while some of my colleagues across the aisle have spread disinformation about EVs, as co-founder and co-chair of the Future of Transportation Caucus, I would like to set the record straight. Investing in electric vehicles is good for the environment, it's good for people's pocketbooks, it's good for public health, and it is good for job creation. Secretary Granholm, regarding that last piece in particular, can you speak to how the Office of Energy Jobs is helping folks take advantage of opportunities from the proliferation of electric vehicles?
Yes, we are seeing, as you've noted, all of these job sites opening up factories to create batteries for electric vehicles, or electric vehicles are assembling the batteries into the vehicles. And it's a new thing. And so the question is, how do you create a workforce that is capable of taking on this whole new sector of the economy? So the Office of Energy Jobs has been working with our friends in labor to be able to create, and with our community colleges, to be able to create a workforce curriculum, for example, for batteries for electric vehicles that can be adopted in any part of the nation, but can have certified workers to be able to do that. Every time you have a new factory open up, there's an opportunity for an economic cluster, and that cluster has to include the workforce component of it, and that's what the Energy Jobs Office is doing.
Thank you. I know certainly in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we're encouraged by the developments in this space that we're already seeing, and certainly look forward to our continued partnership with your agency. Mr. Chair, I want to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a Boston Globe article titled, "What EV Slowdown? Electric Transition is Still Booming in Massachusetts."
Without objection, so ordered.
Now I want to discuss another priority in the Commonwealth, which should come as no surprise to you, and that is wind energy. Earlier this year, the Department of Energy announced a multi-million-dollar center of excellence to accelerate the domestic wind energy industry based in Massachusetts, AERO, which stands for Academic Center for Reliability and Resilience of Offshore Wind, is led by the University of Massachusetts Amherst, with partners from across the nation, from Northeastern University in my district to Morgan State and HBCU in Maryland to the University of Puerto Rico. AERO will help propel us toward a 100% clean electricity grid, a goal outlined in the Green New Deal and a key part of the Biden-Harris administration's climate agenda. I'm excited to see this work take off because there are significant benefits in harnessing wind as a renewable energy source, and one of those benefits is jobs, well-paid, union-backed jobs. Secretary Granholm, how can Congress help support workforce development in the domestic offshore wind energy industry to fill those roles, from manufacturers to electricians and beyond?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, I think the biggest thing that Congress can do, Congress has done in terms of providing the incentives for these wind developers, for the ability for us to build the wind turbines in the United States instead of importing them from, so especially offshore wind from Europe. And so there's been a huge cluster of activity around just that, creating the workforce for those jobs. Once the jobs are coming, you want to train people for jobs that are there rather than the hypothetical job that might come. And so that's exactly what is happening all across the country.
Thank you. And one more in these last 30 seconds or so. I just want to build upon the question posed by my good colleague there, Congresswoman Brown from Ohio. How is the Department of Energy ensuring that marginalized communities benefit from job opportunities in the green economy? How do we ensure that the green economy is inclusive to Black, brown, low-income folks, especially those who have been hardest hit by this climate crisis, representing frontline communities?
Yeah, two things. I mean, Congress has done its part by providing additional incentives, tax credits, like an additional kicker if a development goes into a disadvantaged community, which is great. And that's doing a lot of the work DOE is doing our part by requiring these community benefit agreements for the grants that we give out, requiring that those private sector entities who get a grant from us have to have an agreement with the community about how people will be employed and trained and how the community will benefit from their presence.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Palmer from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, in response to a question a little while ago about the sale of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, you said that that was in response to the war in Ukraine. Is that correct?
Yes.
The first sale under the Biden administration occurred in November 2021. Sold 50 million barrels in an attempt to lower gasoline prices. That's 3 months before the war began, so I think you need to reevaluate your answer. By the way, the price of a gallon of gas in December of 2020 was $2.28. December 21, it was $3.41. This according to the Energy Information Administration. December 22, it was $3.32. So the administration sold 50 million barrels plus the additional barrels they sold later, as you say, because of the war in Ukraine, to affect gasoline prices by 9 cents. And by the way, according to EIA, the price of a gallon of regular gasoline right now is $3.73, $1.45 a gallon higher than it was in December 2020. You made a comment while you were in Paris that China's dominance in the world's critical mineral supply chain is one of the pieces of the supply chain that we're very concerned about in the United States. Do you stand by that?
Yes.
I'm very appreciative of that because I agree 100% that China is the existential threat to our economy and to our national security. But what's interesting is Alabama just rejected a Chinese Communist Party tied EV company's project that would have been located in northwest Alabama near Muscle Shoals that is now being located in Michigan. Did you have any role in the decision to locate that plant in Michigan?
No.
Thank you for the answer, because I think it's interesting that decisions are being made to bring companies in that have direct ties to the Chinese Communist Party to build EV batteries when we are already overly dependent on China for our critical minerals. As a matter of fact, China is responsible for 60% of the worldwide production and 85% of the processing capacity. It's not just a matter of whether or not we mine the minerals here. It's a matter of whether we're able to process them or refine them. And I don't think there's a major rare earth refinery in the Western Hemisphere. So I'm concerned about where we are in critical minerals. I don't think our future's in electric vehicles, not in the short term, definitely. But I do think that this mass transition to renewables is making us even more, it's creating an even greater national security risk because of our dependence on China for critical minerals and rare earths and the processing and refining.
May I respond to that?
Yes, ma'am.
The administration shares your concern, and that's why we've signed into, the President has signed into law and Congress has passed all of these incentives to bring critical minerals extraction, refining, processing, incorporation into the battery in the United States. As I was saying at the very beginning, because of these incentives, our U.S. graphite production, for example, is expected to increase 25-fold by 2030. Our lithium extraction and processing is expected to increase 85-fold. So we want to get those processors here so that we can be
I appreciate
independent.
what you're trying to do there, but the problem with us is the permitting. We need to take an attitude, a position that this is so critical to our national security that we permit some of these mines immediately, and we're not subjecting ourselves to endless litigation on the permitting. We're going to abide by all the environmental rules. But your goals of achieving 100% renewable are not achievable with our dependence on China. Our goals of our national security and the security of our economy are not achievable as long as we have this dependence on China. And we're not going to get there in the mining, the processing, and refining unless we reform our permitting process. Are you willing to participate in that effort?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you on that. And that's the whole point, is that we want to become independent of China, and bringing all of that here or with allies is so important, the full steps of the supply chain.
Well, I really would encourage the administration to be more sensitive to our positions on energy, critical minerals, rare earths, and on not inviting China to come in and build facilities here that will compromise us. And I do appreciate your responses. It's one of these rare times that you and I have agreed, but I do appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Lee from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we've heard today, my Republican colleagues would like to use this hearing to bolster this narrative that the Biden administration is enacting a war on energy. And we recognize that that is falsely promoting this idea that combating the climate crisis is somehow mutually exclusive with promoting economic security. But we know that this is a decades-old myth that's been used to excuse the unmitigated polluting of frontline communities, especially communities like mine in Braddock in the Mon Valley of Western Pennsylvania. For generations, communities like this, largely black or brown or poor and working class communities, have been kind of made into these sacrificial lambs, right? Left to sacrifice their health, to sacrifice the air quality or the water quality in their communities, mostly for the sake of good jobs, but also for the economic prosperity that the nation has enjoyed. Passage of the Inflation Reduction Act serves as to prove that this argument is not just a false choice, but that we can and we will, and we have the tools to fight the climate crisis while creating high quality and union jobs. In Pennsylvania, the IRA is expected to create more than 200,000 jobs over the next decade, and it'll incentivize investments in low-income and disinvested communities that have been harmed the most and that stand to lose the most. But to make these goals and the intent of the IRA a reality, implementation matters, of course. President Biden's Justice 40 initiative, for instance, aims to ensure that 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments, including investments in clean energy, workforce development, and the remediation of legacy pollution, go to disadvantaged communities. However, prioritizing grants funding through Justice 40 isn't enough on its own to combat decades of underinvestment and disinvestment in frontline energy communities. I'm happy because I feel like in years past, some of these questions about how do our policies impact marginalized and frontline communities probably would have gone unasked. And I'm proud that we've had several folks sitting here today ask these very questions. I do want to leave a second. If there is anything specific or even more specific, like for instance, a community like mine, that is a community that for a long time has not had the opportunity to turn a corner, because we haven't had the opportunity to think about the future economies, particularly as we think about steel. How can communities like mine, in the shadows of the steel industry, as it's struggling to figure out how or where it goes next, how does the IRA and the DOE impact our communities?
Yeah, I mean, let me just say, the great thing about the president having signed that first executive order on Justice 40 was that means that everybody's thinking about how do we make sure that we do right by communities that have stood at the back of the line. And so what Congress did in providing, for example, a 10% incentive, additional stackable tax credit for locating in a disadvantaged community, that has achieved, if policy works, that has actually achieved and steered and drawn investment to disadvantaged communities. We're doing our part with our community benefits agreement. We've just stood up an entity called READY, which is working with communities to know how to negotiate a community benefit agreement on their behalf. What do I ask for, et cetera? Giving them technical assistance in making sure they've got a level playing field in negotiating. But all of the work that Congress has done has given us the ability to help communities that have been at the back of the line.
Thank you. And similarly, as someone from Pittsburgh, I represent both a marginalized frontline community and also a community where labor is incredibly important. Part of building a new energy economy is the development of a workforce that is high quality and unionized. A 2023 DOE Office of Energy Jobs report found that workers in the energy sector were more than 1.5 times more more likely to be represented by a union or covered under a project, labor, or collective bargaining agreement. In Western Pennsylvania, we know the value of good union jobs. So it's crucial that federal investments coming to our region and every other region benefit from a strengthened, benefit and strengthen our robust unionized workforce. And as we grow our unionized workforce, to be very clear, we also have the dual responsibility of ensuring we're creating pathways for those traditionally underrepresented in the trade unions, and particularly women and people of color, to participate. So, Secretary Granholm, how is the DOE working to ensure that the growing energy workforce includes high-quality union jobs? And even more specifically, the intent is to focus on labor agreements specifically, right? So how is the department prioritizing project labor agreements and competitive grants allocations to ensure we're supporting unionized workforce?
We encourage project labor agreements, and projects that come to us are evaluated on the strength of their community benefit plans, which also require paying of prevailing wage and having strong labor practices. So we are doing our part to embed a movement that will allow for more unionization, but we can't require unionization. We can just say we expect people to be treated well and paid well, and hopefully the private sector takes it from there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate your time. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Groffman from Wisconsin.
Yeah, I'll point out, I think we have the most divisive administration I've ever seen. And one of the things that bothers me, I have union workers in my district. I get along with them well. Some of them support me. But there's this almost hatred for non-union workers. And I hope there are rumors out there that maybe illegally on some contracting, you don't do a lot of the contracting, that they're giving preferences to unionized companies, or in other words, discriminating against non-union. I know that shouldn't be done, but that rumor is out there. And certainly statements like that, in which we, in essence, run down non-union workers and imply that we shouldn't care about them, are not helpful in an already divided country. Well, in any event, there is the mandate that we have a lot more electric vehicles within the next 7 years. I talked to a lot of my car dealers about it. They feel that there's no way we're going to be generating enough electricity in this country to deal with this many. I'd like to ask you, how much additional electricity do you think this country is going to have to generate in order to prepare for this onslaught of electric cars in 8 years?
Well, we're going to see demand increase, not just because of vehicles, but because of data centers and AI, as well as the additional manufacturing facilities that are coming online. NERC has projected that it will, in the next decade, you will see about a 15% increase in electricity demand. But the good news is we have got the tools to be able to respond to that demand increase. Can I just say one other thing? Just to be very clear, we care about all workers, union or not. Just to make it very clear, we care about all workers having the benefit of a good paying job, and that's what we're working for.
You ought to sit on this committee for a couple months. I mean, some of the members on the other side of the aisle, it's like all they care about is if you're unionized. And I know so many good people, great people who aren't unionized, and they should represent them as well. Next question I have, and you can tell me this is true. I knew a guy with a car, and electric car, and he had to hook up stuff in his garage. He wanted to be prepared to hook up right there, and he felt for the hookup it cost him $8,000. Is that possible?
I don't know. I don't know the circumstances or how far away he was from the line, et cetera. Normally, that's definitely way more expensive than what it would cost to just plug in your garage.
Okay. I kind of want to follow up here on what Mr. Donald said. Right now, we're kind of cutting back a little bit on the amount of natural gas we're producing, which will result in raising the cost of natural gas, which will be bad for the American middle class, like a lot of policies. Maybe the poor are subsidized and the rich don't care, but it hurts the middle class, not to mention it's going to drive up the price of natural gas for countries that export it, like Iran and Russia. Could you comment on that? I mean, the fact that obviously if we're restricting natural gas production, we will be driving up the cost, or we could drive down the cost by producing more?
We're not doing anything to restrict natural gas production.
Okay. You don't feel that your policies are increasing the price of natural gas on the world markets?
No, sir.
Okay. With regard to the strategic oil reserve, I'm not sure that's true. With regard to the strategic oil reserve, do you know right off your hand how many billions of barrels we had when President Biden took office and how many we have today?
We have 365 million barrels today. The maximum that the reserve holds is over 700, but I don't know the exact number the day he took office.
I think it's about a 40% reduction since he took office. Does that concern you? I mean, I always figure you can get a short-term benefit in getting rid of our strategic oil reserves, but if it ever comes down to when we really need them, if this country was at war or whatever, then we'd have a big problem. Do you have any goals? If it's dropped from 630 to 368, do you have any goals between now and the end of President Biden's term as far as where you want to have that wind up? Are we going to work our way back to 630? What do you think?
We are in the process of solicitation for refilling. We've been refilling. We've refilled about
very mildly.
Pardon me?
Very mildly. I mean, you can get back to the 630, or how close to the 630?
Well, let me just say that part of the reduction was because of congressionally mandated sales as well. We've got about 100 million of congressionally mandated sales that are still on tap. We can talk about that. We worked with Congress, thank you, to cancel 140 million. So we're basically back to where we would have been had we not been doing the releases in response to the war in Ukraine.
Okay.
And we have the largest in the world, so I'm not concerned to your initial question. I'm not concerned that we would not be able to
consumers.
respond.
We started at 630. Where do you think we'll be next January?
I think we'll be back to where we would have been, again, because of congressional sales, absent the release of the 180 million barrels.
Okay, thank you.
Chair recognizes Mr. Frost from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Madam Secretary. It's great to be here with you. The Department of Energy has sent a lot of money to the state of Florida, strengthen and modernize our power grid, build resilience as the climate crisis worsens, creating better jobs, reducing energy burden and costs for disadvantaged communities. And this money was made possible thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law. Florida wasn't the only recipient. Obviously, you were also able to get the DOE to award funds directly to community organizations and solar companies in Puerto Rico in a model that I've heard a lot about on a trip I actually recently took to Puerto Rico, ensuring that the award wasn't bottlenecked with an administering agency. My constituents want to see this model used more broadly across the federal government, especially for folks in Puerto Rico, for HUD awards, Department of Justice awards, et cetera. So I'm just curious, how exactly does this model work, specifically as it relates to Puerto Rico? And can you talk about anything that you had to overcome, any administrative hurdles you had to overcome to make that happen?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. I mean, Puerto Rico, as you know, is very unique in the fact that there are layers of bureaucracy there to get anything done. Congress gave us $1 billion to be able to do rooftop solar. Thank you so much for supporting that. What we have done is we went throughout all of the island to hear how we should be distributing this, how should we be prioritizing the putting of solar panels on homes. And citizens there said to a person, please prioritize people with disabilities, people who are poor and in last mile communities, and people who've got a health issue. So we have done that, and we've done this by tapping local community members who are in the best position to identify who those people are. Verified, of course, through their, are they qualified for SNAP, et cetera. They have to be a verification. But they are our eyes and ears and arms, really, on the ground to identify who should be able to get rooftop solar. And so we're excited to begin that process. We hope that this summer we call the Summer of Solar for Puerto Rico, and to be able to make people energy independent in light of how fragile the grid is there.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you know what Americans want when it comes to federal funding is more community engagement, empowerment by directly granting awards to local governments, community groups, advocacy, or nonprofits, organizations, and small businesses. Now, a lot of my colleagues on this committee have been talking about their concern for American-made energy, and I want to talk about that. Fossil fuels like coal, natural gas, petroleum products are driving the climate crisis, as we know. Clean energy comes from renewable, zero-emission sources like solar, wind, hydroelectric, geothermal, and biomass sources. And the clean energy transition is urgent for humanity, but also for the state of Florida, as we are a frontline community in the climate crisis. Advances in technology and grid management, like those facilitated by the bipartisan infrastructure law, shore up reliability of renewable energy. Madam Secretary, how can we combat the climate crisis without transitioning to clean energy?
Well, you can't.
Okay. And if we fell behind other countries in following these advancements in solar, wind, hydroelectric, geothermal, and biomass energy, how might that impact our ability to sustain and meet our growing energy needs?
Well, let me just say that this is, our allies, our economic competitors out there, they're all vying for a piece of this from an economic point of view. They see the fact that this is a $23 trillion global market, this clean energy. All of these countries are going to need the products to be able to get them to their goals. So we have friendly competition with our allies and our adversaries about who's going to get those jobs. And so on the jobs front, this is very important, and it's why the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law have been so impactful, that we've got 600 factories so far that have announced that they're expanding as a result of those incentives in the United States, making us competitive globally. So from a global competition economically, it's vital. Obviously, we've got to do our part from a climate change perspective as well. All of the countries do. So we're working on both fronts, and actually one complements the other, and it's a win-win.
Exactly. And I think it's a really exciting time in this work, too. I mean, we have the opportunity to build a new green economy, centers workers, fights the climate crisis, and where everybody can do well. And we can't shackle America, shackle our country, because not only are we going to suffer as a humanity, but we lose out on the economic benefit. And last question, Madam Secretary, can we invest in clean energy while also looking out for the workers who currently work in fossil fuel production?
Absolutely, absolutely. It is really a primary focus, and I know, Mr. Chairman, you raised this as well. It's a primary focus of this administration. Leave no worker behind. Give them an opportunity to have a future-facing job, for their children to have a future-facing job that pays well. That is the MO of this administration.
Of course. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Burleson from Missouri.
Thank you, Secretary Granholm. We have talked in this hearing about the overregulation of gas stoves, the washers, dryers, refrigerators, but I wanted to kind of dive into the subject of light bulbs. In July of last year, the Department of Energy made manufacturing or selling most incandescent light bulbs illegal. In the U.S., violators who manufacture an illicit light bulb are charged a penalty of $542 per bulb. To add insult...
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
Yeah, the fine for an illicit bulb is $542 per bulb. You're shaking your head.
That's news to me.
You might want to look into that. To add insult, in April 12th of this year, April 12th, sorry, you released a new rule for the LED light bulbs, okay? Now, and even your agency estimates that this new rule will cause the price of LED bulbs to nearly double. Are you aware of that?
I think that's an incorrect statement.
Elaborate.
I don't.
Because your agency says that they estimate that the current light bulb's average price is $2.98 a bulb. After this new rule, which will right now 99% of the LED bulbs do not comply with the new rule, the price would go to $5.68 per bulb, which is a $2.70 increase per bulb, nearly doubling.
No, I think you're cherry picking a bulb, not the overall bulbs. The bottom line is LED light bulbs have been an enormous success. They are hugely impactful for everyday citizens. They save average households $225 a year. They last 25 times longer. They are 89% more efficient. They
Yeah.
save people money.
But then why are you issuing new rules on them that cause?
Well, we're required to issue rules pursuant to
I would
the
think that-
EPCA and the.
I would think you'd want to encourage people who are now can't buy an incandescent bulb because it's illegal to manufacture. I would think that you
They'll
would
be
want
saving
to
money with
dereg-
an LED bulb, though. They will be saving money, significant amounts of money.
Well, and I think that the question is, do you think you think the American consumer is dumb?
Absolutely not.
So if someone's buying an incandescent bulb and choosing to do that over an LED bulb, are they incompetent?
Of course not. Of course not. But we all know that industry can have very persuasive advertising that may not fully reveal the pluses and minuses. And the whole point.
That is another way of saying that they're not educated.
No, that is not a way of saying that at all, sir. Please don't put words in my mouth. What I am saying, though, is that LED bulbs are incredibly efficient, and the conservation standards that we roll out, we are very proud of, because they have saved consumers. They will have saved consumers $2 trillion by 2030, making more efficient appliances.
By making all of them, but the upfront cost is going to be more. Anyway, you're taking away a choice ultimately from consumers. You're taking away that choice. I want to talk about electric vehicles. Last year you had a EV trip in 2023. How did that go?
It was a great trip.
It was
one glitch, but it was a great trip other than
okay, one glitch. What was the glitch?
The glitch was that we couldn't get a charging port, but that's part of what the trip was identifying, both barriers as well as how well things are going, including the visiting of all of these electric vehicle manufacturing, battery manufacturing.
And you had the privilege of having staff painstakingly even map this trip out, correct?
Yes.
And did you have a situation where they locked down a charging station and made it unavailable for consumers?
Yes.
Were you aware that there was a family that
No,
was impacted?
I learned about this afterward. It was a mistake.
Thank you for admitting that. I appreciate. Have you reached out to that family and apologized to them?
I will apologize to them now. I don't know who they are, but I heard about it in the story, and it was not appropriate for staff to do that.
I appreciate those remarks. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Tlaib.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We always talk about choice in this committee. You know, there is a really big choice that I think a lot of my residents want to make, which is the choice to breathe clean air. Secretary Granholm, you know this throughout my public service career. I've represented numerous communities, frontline communities, that have had really some of the highest burden of hosting fossil fuel infrastructure. It has never been clearer that we must rapidly phase out fossil fuel production and transition to clean, renewable energy. It is deeply disturbing to me that fossil fuel production is at a record high under the current administration. And I know President Biden's fully aware of that position. I grew up in Southwest Detroit, where I thought smelling like rotten eggs was normal, that all my friends had asthma was normal. To see in one of my communities that I represented in the State House, and then 4 years in Congress, 48217, to see white crosses in front of people's homes, I thought, what is this about? And it was a White Cross campaign to say if anybody had cancer or survived cancer, or somebody in their family died of cancer, they put a white cross on their front lawns, trying to humanize and understand the toll of hosting corporate polluters. Even now in 48120 in my community, I have two very, very dense populated schools. And in their background is literally just one of the largest polluters in the state of Michigan. And I always look at Wayne County's Clean Air Act standards and continue to see we don't follow sulfur dioxide and a number of other issues coming up, but it comes up over and over again with my residents. So it is important to me in the decision what you all are doing regarding liquefied natural gas. It's documented, well-documented public health harms caused by LNG exports, and how they're associated to larger harms to Black, Brown, Indigenous communities, low-wealth communities. And so LNG exports perpetuate, I think, systematic environmental racism and just really embedded in our fossil fuel economy. So Secretary Granholm, as a member of the White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council, do you believe DOE should consider environmental justice implications of approving additional LNG exports and extending the life at LNG terminals?
One of the factors that we are evaluating in our review is what the impacts are on communities.
Does this warrant additional study, though, by DOE prior to resuming analogies, the licensing?
Well, that's why we are going through this. We have 2 national labs who are looking at a variety of factors, and this is one of them.
We all know, and I know, Secretary, you know, DOE has a statutory duty to conduct these public interest determinations before authorizing exports to certain countries, and is a mandate and has a mandate to deny projects that are not in the public interest. It shouldn't be controversial, and these are from my colleagues, please. It should not be controversial that the public interest determination should consider the most up-to-date science and best practices. This is so critical in understanding and mitigating the short and long-term health problems that toxic LNG export sites cause, including heart disease, cancer, and organ damage. Secretary Granholm, how is DOE working to protect the health of public health and economies of the marginalized communities that most often are forced to live near these export facilities?
Well, in general, we have a whole effort that is particularly focused on the Gulf Coast, which is where so many of these facilities are, not just LNG terminals, but the petrochemical industry. It's one of the reasons why we're enthused that there is a whole component, for example, of the hydrogen hub that's focused on electrification of diesel trucks, of making sure that there are fewer particulates in the air that people are breathing. It is clearly environmental justice 40, ensuring that we get clean investments into communities is embedded throughout not only the Department of Energy, but the administration.
Yeah, and it's important for my colleagues to know both Trump and the Obama administrations have done this before. This is not the first time. This is just a friendly request. Please, as DOE updates its studies and that inform the public interest determination, that it would include meaningful public engagement with host communities as part of that process. I think that's incredibly important for the American people to be part of this process, that it's not a closed-door process, that they understand that they have a say in what they have to live with. Thank you.
Chair now recognizes the committee's energy expert, Representative Fallon from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Granholm, when were you confirmed, roughly month and year?
In February.
February 21, right after the administration started. So I was a little bit concerned when I saw the news report that in November 21 you were asked how many barrels of oil the U.S. consumes daily, and you didn't know at the time. You remember that?
I remember.
Okay. So chance of redemption. How many barrels of oil do we consume every day?
We consume about, well, the world does 100. We do about 20. Again, these are ballpark.
Yeah, I just saw it on your website. It was on 102 and 22. So the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, we were talking about that before, founded, I believe, it was 1975. And do you know at the height, and I think one of my colleagues just asked you, at the height of the prior administration, what the number was?
It was, well, I can tell you that the maximum is about 720.
Right. And then under the Trump administration, at one point, it was at 695 million barrels. When you all took office, do you have any idea where it was at?
What was it at?
I believe it was 638. And today it's at, you just said 365, I think?
365.
Okay. So it's a 42% reduction. And you testified before I came into the committee that it was the Ukrainian war had something to do with the sale. That wasn't accurate because 50 million barrels was sold in November of 21 before the invasion. And then you just said when I did get here that it was congressionally mandated, but according to the Congressional Research Service, the congressionally mandated is only a fraction of that 270 million. Are you aware of that?
There was 140 million in congressionally mandated sales that we have canceled to be able to get back. And then there's another 99 million that is teed up to go.
But that congressionally mandated, some of that was canceled was for FY 24 to 27, was it not?
Right, yeah, it's multiple years.
So I'm talking about what actually has physically happened. We have sold 270 million barrels. That was not, those 270 million barrels were not, the majority of that was not congressionally mandated sales.
Well, because we've canceled, because we've ended up canceling.
But
my point is,
we're going around in circles. But that cancellation was from sales that would have occurred in the future, not what has already happened in the past.
Correct, correct.
So if it wasn't Ukraine and it wasn't congressionally mandated,
It was Ukraine. 180 million barrels were from the Ukraine war, the war in Ukraine.
no, you did it after they happened to have invaded, but that wasn't the reason. I think the reason was because you were trying to depress the price of gasoline at the pump.
There was a
before
constriction on the
November.
global
Ma'am,
market,
excuse me, I'm
sir.
reclaiming my time. I'm not going to be interrupting you. It was before the midterm elections in November, because this in 1975 was designed for, I don't know, act of God, natural disaster, national emergency, time of war, none of which has occurred in this country, and 270 million barrels were sold inexplicably. And it's, by the way, I don't think that, was it your testimony that we have the largest reserve, strategic petroleum reserve in the world?
Yeah,
Not China?
we have the largest in the world. That's publicly made available.
Okay, so the Chinese don't have a billion barrels in reserve?
They don't publicly report what they have.
Okay, because that's what the experts believe that is. So we have a fraction of what they have.
Well, I don't know what they have.
Okay. So over the past 20 years, has the United States increased or decreased our carbon footprint?
Over the past
20 years, 20,
Yes,
20.
we've decreased.
We decreased it by about 20%. Has China increased or decreased?
They've increased, sir.
Increased by, you have any idea?
I don't know their
I'm talking Energy 101. I'm not going to get complicated.
Oh, I don't have the percentage
Okay,
in front of me.
triple, about 300%. So we've done exceptionally well. So would you agree that the United States has a greater commitment to protecting the environment than, let's say, China?
I think we have a greater commitment to protecting the environment than China, yes.
Yeah, I think that's manifestly obvious considering what they've done in the last 25 years or so. And incidentally, for the record, our economy is larger than theirs, and yet they are far more apt to, unfortunately, ignore their responsibilities for the environment. Do you think that we have a greater commitment to protect the environment than, let's say, Venezuela?
I think we have a greater commitment to protecting the environment, yes.
Yeah, and Qatar as well?
Yes.
Okay. Because we have a strong environmental lobby, we have a rule of law. None of those countries have those kinds of things. So it perplexes me that we would put essentially a ban, people call it a pause, on liquefied natural gas exports, and we're just giving a gift to one of the most evil dictators in the world, Vladimir Putin.
We are not giving a gift to Vladimir Putin. We are pausing for months while we update a study, and it will resume after that update happens.
Oh, I bet you it's going to resume magically right after the November elections, but be that as it may, I've talked to prime ministers and foreign ministers in Europe, and they're not happy with this at all. I hope that you talk to the same people.
I have talked to them, and
Chairman,
they've
I yield back.
explained, and they...
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize Mr. Fry from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm actually going to pick up right where Mr. Fallon kind of left off a little bit, but I want to focus, Madam Secretary, on the companies themselves. In April of this year, Brad Crabtree testified in front of the Subcommittee on Economic Growth and Energy Policy that companies were concerned about the pause. Will this pause, in your mind, impact the planning horizons of LNG producers and exporters?
No.
No. So you would disagree with the characterization by Mr. Crabtree?
Well, he said their companies are concerned. I understand that they were concerned, but once people explain that it is a pause, that none of the existing operations are going to be affected, none of the authorized amounts, which have not even begun construction yet, have been affected, none of the construction projects that they are undertaking have been affected, it doesn't affect any of that. None of that. They can proceed apace.
Let me ask you this. How did the DOE factor in the pause on the companies and in the critical aspect? I would say, like, how did y'all weigh that on the production side for the companies?
The companies are able to produce right now. Nobody is stopping any of the companies that have authorization from proceeding. We export, we have capacity to export 14 billion cubic feet. That exists, that is not being stopped. We have authorized another 12 billion cubic feet which are under construction. That is going forward. We have authorized up to 48 billion cubic feet, the difference of which has not even begun construction. That is not impacted by the pause. This does not impact anybody who is doing business or is in construction or even contemplating doing business. And it only will last until the first quarter of next year when we complete the analysis of what's in the public interest.
Recent reporting, Madam Secretary, from the Wall Street Journal noted that Sarah Brennan, the Associate Director at the Rockefeller Family Fund, which has a history of funding anti-fossil fuel groups, stated in an email to environmental groups that, quote, "The pause is the result of a sustained 4-year push that built upon years of opposition to gas exports by community groups and lawyers." So I would ask you, can you tell us how much advance notice was provided on the pause before it was publicly announced?
This was DOE's decision. We announced it when we announced it. We didn't provide advance notice to groups or anything. We announced it when we announced it.
Madam Secretary, has it always been the intent of the administration, the Biden administration, to enact this pause from the beginning?
I'm not aware of what the intent was inside the White House. As I say, this is the Department of Energy's evaluation and decision.
I'm going to switch gears here. Despite decarbonization policies being a key contributor to the premature retirement of fossil fuels, demand for electricity is going to continue to rise throughout the United States. My home state of South Carolina will need new generation as coal plants close or potentially close in the coming years, but without proper and realistic guidance from DOE and the EPA, there's little hope that the grid will actually be as resilient as the administration claims. Madam Secretary, the DOE signed a memorandum of understanding with the EPA to ensure grid reliability. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you believe that the MOU process can still function properly if all the entities obligated to ensure reliability say that it actually isn't achievable?
The EPA is not saying that it's not achievable.
No. The entities are saying that it's not achievable.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said the entities who were parties to the MOU. I think the entities are concerned about whether it is doable. But our experience at Department of Energy, and we consulted with EPA on this, and our knowledge of carbon capture technology tells us that that technology is ready, and it can be installed, and it is doable.
So to me, the MOU seems in a way for the EPA to shift potential blame to the Department of Energy. Even before you testified before the Energy and Commerce Committee 3 weeks ago, at least 3 regional transmission organizations have cited premature retirement of fossil fuel resources as a growing concern with the future of America's grid stability. Couple these concerns with FERC's own forecasts of summer supply shortfalls, and it's clear, I think, that we will have issues with reliability. Many experts have said that the administration's ambitious power plant and carbon capture goals aren't achievable in the desired time frame with our current technology. So who is wrong here?
The goals are achievable with current technology.
Do you think it's the experts or the EPA for whom you've already provided this MOU to implement something that is illegal or harmful to American consumers?
We are not implementing anything that's harmful to American consumers. In fact, it's helpful to America to breathe clean air and have a clean power plant. We are the experts at Department of Energy. We have 17 national labs that are working on this. We have an MOU with the EPA. We know what technology is available, and we believe it's doable.
Thank you, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, now recognize Mr. Waltz from Florida.
Madam Secretary, thank you for coming in. In preparation for the hearing, I watched your appearance on The View, and after one of the hosts was kind of condescending and insulting the intelligence of the 74 million people that voted for President Trump, you talked about, because they were talking about how the prices of everything are so high. You talked about, well, in response, what the American people need to do is take advantage of tax credits to weatherize their homes and take advantage of credits to buy EVs. I found it kind of astounding because I didn't hear anything in your response, and I want to give you a chance today to talk about how the American people need to deal with this. Energy and federal government spending are the 2 greatest drivers of inflation. and it is eating Americans alive. They can't afford rent. They can't afford groceries. They can't afford electricity, right there in your wheelhouse. They can't afford gas. So how are we, with the energy prices so high, with spending so high on a lot of these credits, by the way, EVs only make up 1% of the cars on the road, how are we driving down prices to help the American people?
Yeah, we are really obsessed with reducing prices for people too, and totally get it.
But Madam Secretary, it's not working.
But, well,
I mean, the inflation rate's up almost 20%.
inflation is,
Gasoline's up 55%.
inflation is coming down. When you say, from what point is gasoline up 55%? I don't know what your measurement is from the start of the administration.
Gas prices are high. I mean,
Started the
you can look at where they were in the mid-twos to now the mid-threes.
Yeah, the mid-twos were in the middle of a pandemic. All those prices that you're talking about, they're in the middle of a pandemic when prices are through the floor. It's not a normal time. However, let me say, we are obsessed with making sure we bring down prices for people.
Madam Secretary, I appreciate, I only get 5 minutes on behalf of the people I represent. I appreciate that you're obsessed with it. What you're doing isn't working. These prices are still unacceptably high.
Okay. This is why the president has focused on every way possible to help reduce prices for people. This means whether it is on prescription drugs or whether it is weatherizing your home to reduce your electricity bill, whether it's helping people to be able to get an electric car so they don't have to pay gasoline prices, whether it is reducing student loans, every pocket of way the president is trying to reduce costs for
Except that
people.
he's doing that by printing money and throwing federal dollars at the problem. You got one group of Americans paying student loans for another group. You got one group of Americans paying through their taxes EVs for another group, which, by the way, are not environmentally sound in terms of the materials that go in them. And I would encourage you to read the book Red Cobalt that talks about the 40,000 children that work in the cobalt mines of Congo, some as young as 6. But let's just stick with prices for a moment. Clearly hasn't worked here. But let's talk about abroad. The intelligence community has confirmed for me that, and a number of analysts have confirmed, I mean, obviously Russia fuels its economy on oil and gas. Iran fuels its economy on oil and gas. At about $55 a barrel, Russia can no longer fuel its war machine. It actually goes into kind of economic survival mode. So wouldn't it make sense to flood the global market with cleaner? You admitted in prior testimony American gas is cleaner than what came through Nord Stream 2, correct?
Correct, it's cleaner.
So why wouldn't we flood the world with cleaner, cheaper American oil and gas, drive down the prices? Now you've not only solved what's going on with the Iranian-supported terrorists in the Middle East, you put Putin on his back foot as well in terms of the war in Ukraine. You've now solved 2 global problems and the inflation problem here at home, but instead the climate agenda is counter to all of that. We're restricting our supply, and then we're allowing Iran to pump to China. We're allowing Venezuela to pump. Russia is pumping more than it ever has through India and China, for that matter, into Europe. How does this make sense?
This is so curious to me, because we are the #1 producer of oil and gas. We are the #1 exporter.
But we could be pumping so much more if we weren't tapping the brakes in Anwar, we weren't putting a ban.
Oil dominance. We are doing more than the previous administration, significantly.
How much more could we be doing?
Well,
Madam Secretary, how much more could we be doing? Because the price of oil is still hovering around 80. Demand is still out there. That's why the price of oil and gas are still so high.
Correct.
That's why everybody's still buying Russian oil and Iranian oil.
But it is not this administration that is hampering the production of oil and gas. I mean, you can make that face, but we are #1 in the world. We are at record levels.
Okay, we're at 13. Could we be at 15 million a day? Could we be at 16? Could we be at 17?
Nobody's
I mean, just final question, Mr. Chairman. I just had lunch with the Speaker of the Parliament of Lithuania. She was in near panic mode. Lithuania, right on the front line, probably next after Ukraine with Russia. She said, Congressman, we buy 85% of our gas through the terminals in Louisiana and in Texas. These are bought on very long-term contracts. We're having to think 10 years out. She said, I don't know what to do with the ban.
There is not a ban.
She said, I'm going to have to start looking elsewhere.
We have spoken with
our allies believe it's a ban.
No, they don't. We have spoken with them. They do not believe it's a ban. It is not a ban. It is.
This is. I encourage her to come talk to you.
Update an analysis of what's in the public interest. Nothing is stopping from what is currently being exported.
Time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen's time's expired. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. And Madam Secretary, let me go back and correct something you said earlier. You when we were discussing coal, you said coal shutting down because of economics. It's shutting down because of the economics created by the Biden administration, and even further back than that, the Obama-Biden administration. But, Secretary, my congressional district's home to the former gaseous diffusion plant in Paducah, Kentucky, which is undergoing cleanup by the Department of Energy. As you are aware, the fiscal year 2024 appropriations package required the department to conduct a cost-benefit analysis to determine whether a new administrative facility is the best benefit to the taxpayer versus upgrading the current 70-year-old facility. Madam Secretary, what's the status of this cost-benefit analysis, and when can you expect that it will be available for review?
Yep, let me get back to you on that.
Okay. And let me say, I urge you to move quickly on this analysis so that we can ensure that the upcoming appropriations bill allows the department to move forward with the best option to support cleanup efforts, which is our goal there in Paducah. I was glad to see the Department of Energy award grant funding to the Paducah Chamber of Commerce to review how cleanup efforts can be complemented by future reindustrialization, which is a goal there. Can you provide an update to how the department intends to ensure that cleanup complements reindustrialization?
Well, you're talking about that site?
Yeah, or
in
any
general?
site,
At
but
any
that
site.
one's
Yeah, I
specifically
mean,
would be
this
great.
is one of the things that I think was so important in the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, is that it gave us an incentive to be able to offer, for example, 48C tax credits to former energy communities or energy communities that were challenged. And so to be able to lure manufacturing to those communities is embedded in the tax laws that were passed by Congress. That's true for the way the Loan Programs Office is operating as well. There is a whole component there to be able to help loans for communities that have powered our nation for the past 100 years.
Well, I strongly encourage the department to work closely with the community to ensure that reindustrialization continues in parallel with the cleanup efforts. So, as you know, a crucial part of this reindustrialization will be attracting industries that recognize and utilize the specialized skills and knowledge of the existing regional nuclear energy workforce. To that end, I understand that DOE plans to issue a funding opportunity announcement for novel and innovative nuclear enrichment technologies. Given that DOE has had this funding for nearly 2 years, can you provide a timeline on when that funding opportunity might be released and when DOE plans to make those awards?
Yeah, I have to check with our Office of Nuclear Energy on the exact timing on it, but I can get back to you.
Will that FOA be tailored to encourage the commercialization of new technologies like laser enrichment?
I will have to check with them to see what exactly they're contemplating in terms
Look
of new
forward
technologies.
to getting a response. In recent months, Congress has taken significant action to bolster the front end of the nuclear fuel cycle, including passing a ban on Russian uranium imports, passing the Nuclear Fuel Security Act, and appropriating $2.7 billion to incentivize the new LEU and HALEU capacity. Can you provide assurance that DOE will not establish criteria that would discourage or prevent new market entrants from participating in any competitive funding opportunities associated with this new funding?
Sure, if we're putting out a RFP, we would make sure that it's competitive. We encourage all suppliers.
So when does the DOE plan to make awards related to that new funding?
Yeah, we're going to, I mean, obviously this is a whole strategy, this uranium strategy, the $2.7 billion, and so we're really being thoughtful about it. I know you had a hearing with Dr. Huff about the way it is being implemented, both for HALEU as well as for low-enriched uranium. So we expect that in the next few months we will be able to have more to say about the sequence and the timing of putting out funding opportunities.
Well, we'd like to work with you on that and have a community, Paducah, that is really ahead of the curve and working together. And I strongly encourage you. They've had a multi-year relationship with the DOE over the previous 3 or 4 administrations. So we think there's a lot of opportunity there to where the community can work with the DOE in lots of new opportunities for good paying jobs. And in my remaining few seconds, I have to say that I want to make a plug. We're very blessed in America to have the greatest energy economy anywhere. That's anchored by the oil companies. And oil is something that it's a commodity we use every day. I strongly encourage this administration not to saddle the industry with excessive and burdensome rules and regulations that are only increasing the cost to consumers, which is fueling inflation in America. We believe that as many of my colleagues have stated, our energy opportunity is much greater than what we're utilizing now. And we believe the thing that's holding us back are bad policies and burdensome rules and regulations by the Biden administration. So we strongly encourage you to work closely with the energy companies. Not only do they provide tremendous energy for American consumers, they provide good paying jobs to their workers and pay a lot of taxes that keep our communities afloat. So I wanted to mention that because this was a energy hearing. I don't see any further questioners, so we will close. I want to thank you, Secretary, for being here today and for answering questions. The Oversight Committee is not as bad as they say on TV. This was hopefully you'll tell your colleagues in the cabinet that this was a good experience, and hopefully we'll see more of your cabinet colleagues in front of this committee like we're supposed to do. So with that and without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and to submit additional written questions for the witnesses, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. If there's no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned. I got to interview.